the people, by the people. For the culture.
Peace. Jumbo. Welcome to the VITAL HOOPS Podcast, right here on Black Power Media, Reloaded. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International XB. I am your host. This is episode number 66. First and foremost, like, share, subscribe. Go to blackpowermedia.org. Get your Afro Pick magazine, get you some merch. Make sure you check out the other shows on this channel. Also, if you look in the description, there are a couple of ways you can support VITAL HOOPS. Please do so if you are able to. I appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to leave a comment and let me know what you like, what you don't like. I'm always open for constructive criticism. And if you want to see anybody on the show, please let me know as well. Now, our guest today is a born and raised universal African nationalist, a Garveyite. He's an organizer and a spoken word artist. He is the founder and director of Kimbunga Media, and he was on the Rise Up morning show not too long ago, episode 22 to be exact. Make sure you go back and check that out as well. Shout out to the Rise Up International Morning Show. Our guest today is ShakaRa. Brother ShakaRa, peace. Welcome to the VITAL HOOPS Podcast. How you doing, my brother?
Peace, my brother. And let me just greet you and the audience. Tendai Mwari. Be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Muzimu Mukulu. We give praises unto our ancestors because our ancestors are worthy to be praised. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Ashe. Appreciate that, my brother.
Yes, sir.
So before we get started, I just want to make sure everybody, please stop what you're doing. Go to Kimbunga Media, please, and subscribe. Make sure you do that if you haven't yet. If you're rocking with us over here at Black Power Media, you probably already know what's going on over there at Kimbunga Media. But just in case, make sure you go check that out because the brother over here has got some of the best content, when it comes to the liberation of our people, to Panafrikanism. And so yeah, big up to you, my brother, for what you're doing over there.
Thank you, my brother. And I want to say thank you for the invitation. I'm a big fan of Black Power Media and the work that is taking place on Black Power Media. And I've had an opportunity to check out your show, as well. And so something that most people don't know about me is that my grandfather was actually born in Cuba. Wow. My paternal grandfather. So wow. To a Jamaican migrant to Cuba, and my great grandma is actually from Cuba. Wow. And so my grandfather grew up in Jamaica, but was actually born in Cuba. So I've always been very interested in the politics of Cuba. And so I've been watching your shows and learning, some things. So we're definitely going to invite you on to talk more about the dynamics of Cuba, especially as it relates to African people. So give thanks for the work that you're doing.
I would love that. That would be my honor. And thank you. Listen, it's funny that you said that because actually I was going to mention this later on, but one of the best videos I have seen, on the internet when it comes to, Afro-Cubans and African people related to Cuba and the Cuban Revolution was one that I seen on your channel. You have a video called "Was Castro's Cuban Revolution a Victory for African People?" And that is, and I'm going to put the link down in the description for everybody to go check that out. And, that is truly one of the best videos I've seen,
Beautiful.
Because, there's just not enough talk about this. And I think it's an important matter, definitely. Because, me as an Afro-Cuban, organizing in Cuba, we go through, people don't understand, we go through a lot, as African people, when we put Africans first, even in Cuba. So I appreciate that.
My brother, thank you very much for that endorsement. And so that video is on my personal channel. It's not on Kimbunga Media yet, but it's funny you say that because I'm literally editing it now to share it on Kimbunga Media. So
That's
do
great.
stay tuned. Yeah, we're going to be resharing that. It's
No
it's
doubt.
an important conversation.
It is.
And a subject that not enough people know about. So give
Absolutely.
thanks, and soon we'll bring you on as well, to shed some even more light, yeah, on that particular situation. You know.
Anytime, my brother. Appreciate that.
Mm.
Okay, I want to begin by, you letting the listeners know a little bit because, you grew up within the movement. You're a Garveyite and you grew up
Yes,
within the
sir.
movement.
Yes, sir.
Obviously some brothers and sisters have as well, but, a lot of us haven't. I mean, I grew up, my father was a proud black man, from Cuba, but he wasn't a Pan-Africanist.
Mm. Mm.
I started learning, getting my education, but I really became a Pan-Africanist, as far as my politics and everything later on in life, right?
Right.
You were born within the movement. So if you can, let the listeners know a little bit more about, what that is like, the experience a little bit,
Yes. It's a very interesting experience. I have one of my big brothers. I'm a spoken word artist, and one of my big brothers in my spoken word collective, Best Kept Secret, says he uses the analogy from the Matrix and says that I was born in Zion. Yeah. So to speak, because it's like you grow up with a consciousness and an awareness, yeah, that generally speaking, the majority of your peers may not be necessarily engaged in as deeply, although there's a generic black consciousness that may exist. So within our organization, I was born and raised in an organization called the Al-Kebula Revivalist Movement and the Pan-African community more generally. And we were charged with the responsibility of creating teachable moments, yeah, among our peers. You know what I'm saying? So we grew up with that responsibility from very, very young. It can be very isolating sometimes, but it also connects you to a global community of people at the same time. Right. And so, I can recall as a child, standing in solidarity with Mumia Abu Jamal, for example, and collections being made for whatever was taking place, yeah, with Mumia. We were connected significantly to the movement in Azania, South Africa. Yeah, I was born in 1985, which I believe you are as well.
No doubt. Yep.
Yeah. So that at that time, the liberation movement in Zimbabwe and Azania, South Africa was serious. Yeah, and there was a significant element of that movement over here. The Pan-African movement over here is in fact very, very connected to the development of the Pan-African Congress of Azania. Yeah. And so because of the demographics of London, of the UK, but London in particular, the movement over here is very much full of relatively recent migrants from the continent and from the Caribbean. Yeah. Okay. And so that creates a kind of a unique environment because a lot of us came over here and were able to really organize as Pan-Africanists with Africans from around the world who were living in the country. Yeah. And so there's so many things, and there's work I'm going to do about this because this is a question I get asked often. But at the same time, we were also encouraged as children and young people to not see ourselves as superior to and above the rest of our community. Yeah. That we were very much a part of our community, and we must see the problems of our community through the lens of our community, but not as Pan-African elitists, yeah, okay, who feel like because we've read, Marcus Garvey and Assata Shakur, that we're somehow, better than the rest of our people. That our consciousness was a responsibility, not an accolade, if that makes sense, to be lauded over the rest of our people, in particular our peers. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah, appreciate that. And it's funny that you mentioned how in Great Britain, there's a lot of our people are in certain aspects closer to the motherland because they've came over not too long ago, and it's kind of the same where I'm currently living in France, and it's kind of similar over here. It's a similar situation where there's maybe two generations, but it's not really like us in the Caribbean, in Cuba and Jamaica and in Haiti, or even in the United States where our families have been there for many more years.
Yeah.
So that's a little difference, but we still see very similar things as far as our people being colonized mentally as well. Like some people forget that on the continent as well we were colonized.
Yes,
mentally as
sir.
well, so
Yes, sir. 100%.
yeah, so yeah, that's one thing that but yeah, so I wanted to definitely bring you on today because I wanted to really center this conversation around the philosophy and ideology of race first, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I recently had on, the sister Rosa Clemente, shout out to Rosa,
Mm-hmm.
here on the VITAL HOOPS podcast on the previous episode 65. And, we spoke about anti-Africanness, anti-Blackness, and anti-Africanness within South America. But this is something that, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a lot, and I've seen this pretty much around the world. This is something that the worldwide ideology is anti-Blackness, right? It's something that you see around the globe. And no matter where you go, our people are pretty much at the bottom of society, even within societies where we are the majority, right? Where African people are the majority, even in societies where we've been through revolution, like Cuba, we still see our people, at the bottom of society.
Absolutely.
So this is kind of what brought me to this, to the reflection that race first was the way to go, right? The only way to really within Pan-Africanism.
Right.
I would love for you to please break it down because a lot of people don't necessarily understand what race first is about. So if you could please break it down.
So first of all, initially, race first is a principle within African fundamentalism, which is an ideological foundation that is defined as African fundamentalism by the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. And then within the more broad encompassing terms for Garveyism in theory and practice is universal African nationalism. Right. And so we say that there are four fundamental principles of African fundamentalism or universal African nationalism. Race first being the first, then it's self-reliance, and nationhood, and so those first three were identified by Babatoni Martin, who is the foremost scholar on the life and legacy of of the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and author of the book Race First, and so because I was born and raised in an organization that made culture and spirituality central to our liberations as African people, we also add African spiritual cultural orthodoxy, which means having an authentic worldview and way of life that is born of our authentic and original and indigenous culture, and so those are the four principles of African fundamentalism. Race first is the first because every liberation movement has to define the people, has to define the people that it is in service to, has to define the people that it is desiring to organize, and has to define the people upon whose behalf it is fighting, and so the principle of race first really begins with the identification of ourselves as a group of people, as a political identity that has specific interests. And in this instance, that identity is referred to as African, African people, intended to be an umbrella term, an all-encompassing term for all of the varieties of who we are as African people. Right. And the term African is closely related to the term Black, but is intended to add more substance, to it in terms of culture, in terms of land, and in terms of heritage, what unites us as a people is our common heritage, So that's the first thing, that we are identifying a political cultural entity, as a people, and that is based upon so for example, Papa Garvey himself says, in a world of wolves, one must go armed. And one of the most powerful defensive weapons within reach of our people is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. And that is basically identifying the fact that as far as white power Western imperialism, they have organized themselves as a race of people to oppress us as a race of people. And in our Kebulan, we define race first as race awareness and cultural emancipation first, so that we are not simply looking at skin color, isolated from other dynamics, if that makes sense. Yeah, that our skin complexion, the variety of our skin complexions is symbolic of a heritage, but it is our most common identifiable feature. Yeah, at the same time as well. And so, as Amilcar Cabral says, to oppress a people is to attempt to destroy their cultural life. And so our liberation is the reassertion, the redefinition of our cultural life as a people. Yeah. And that's the basic kind of fundamental idea of how race first comes about in the first place. There's more I could say, but let me be guided by your questions, and we'll get into it.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned, Amilcar Cabral, because he also said, that you can define a person's ability to be liberated by how different their culture is to their oppressor's culture.
Absolutely.
Right? And that is key as well. And that speaks to what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Here at Vital Hoops, we always say, for the culture. Vital Hoops is for the culture. That's what.
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
because there's so many things out there that are, completely European and whitewashed and everything that speak about the culture, but they're really talking about subculture, Western culture, and our culture as African people is extremely important, as you mentioned, because culture is more than what people think. Culture is pretty much everything that we do.
Absolutely.
It's not just is what we eat, how we move,
Absolutely.
how we speak. And so how are we going to be liberated if our culture is still the enemy's culture? It's just not.
Sir.
It's just not possible. So I definitely appreciate that. When it comes to race first, a lot of people nowadays have kind of, I want to say, weaponized it. They do that in a way where, like, we see what's going on, for example, now with Kamala Harris, right? And so people will be like, okay, well, she's a black woman, so we have to support her, right?
Yes.
But we're talking about a person that, that represents empire,
Exactly.
And not only that, but does she even identify as an African woman? Does she even live as that? And I wanted to definitely ask you about that. How do you feel about how race first has been weaponized in certain ways and it is used?
So within the Pan-African movement, there's always debates between what are often referred to as nationalists and socialists.
Yeah.
And the debate comes because fundamentally, and there are variations within this, but the basic idea is the debate between race first or class first. And so many times our brothers and sisters who are socialist leaning, and I should also say, let's say Marxist leaning more specifically, condemn or critique nationalist and or Marcus Mosiah Garvey in particular for lacking a class analysis. And I would suggest that this is reflective of not having studied the legacy of Papa Garvey himself and the UNIA-ACL, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and African Communities League in depth. And I would also go as far as to say that there are some people who even claim to be nationalists who have been complicit in giving that false impression. And the you mentioned Kamala. The example I have in mind is Obama. And when the frenzy around Obama was kicking off in 2008 in particular, there were many brothers and sisters who considered themselves nationalists who had a very flawed analysis around Obama and gave the impression that his blackness was sufficient, a sufficient criteria for our support, at that moment in time. And I wish to make it clear that race first is not a principle that calls upon us to celebrate all Black people at all times, regardless of circumstance. And if we understand it properly, we have to understand, and I'm, within the Garveyite movement at the moment, I'm doing a lot of work on what is referred to as scientific Garveyism, which is developing Garveyism as a methodology, and as Mama Amy Jakes Garvey defined it, a working idealism, that we need to update terminology and paradigms, for our times, And so I identify 3 specific criteria and aspects of what it means to be race first. And the first that I've kind of already elucidated is that we are a biocultural entity. Yes, that we are a people that have a particular biological heritage, varied though it is, but a biological heritage nonetheless. Yes, and so and as a result of that, we have a cultural, as Baba Sheikh Anta Diop put it, a cultural unity. Yeah, that we can identify among our varieties basic common principles and paradigms and worldview, as Mama Marimba Ani would say. Absolutely. Yeah, that unites us as a people. Yeah, as a biocultural entity, and then emanating from being a biocultural entity, we are a geopolitical entity. Yes, that we have certain land, political, and economic interest as a result. Yes, of being this biocultural entity. But the third aspect of this is that our destiny and our progress, or what defines our progress as a people, is the interest of the masses of our people. Yeah, not the interest of any individual or any group of elites. Yeah, suggested elites that are imposed upon us, but the natural and informed interest of the masses of the people. In other words, if it doesn't progress and benefit the masses of the people, it is not race first. Race first is not a number of black billionaires who have companies on the American stock market or the London Stock Exchange. Yeah, this is not race first. All right, race first is not a black prime minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain working on behalf of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party and sending bombs to Congo and South Africa and Haiti. This is not race first. Race first is not a black presidential candidate in the United States of America. Race first is not even a black government in a majority black nation. If that black nation is a vassal state and a puppet regime for white power and Western imperialism, this is not race first. Yeah. Sure. And so we have that. And just because, I like to ground things so that being a Garveyite, I'm able to ground things within the tradition. Yes. Of Garveyism. And so it's necessary for us to note that, when Papa Garvey was speaking himself, he spoke about the fact that he cannot be convinced against his convictions. Yeah. Because his convictions are birthed from a very harsh experience. Yeah. And he says, not a personal experience now, not my own individual experience, but a racial experience. Yeah. He even speaks about the fact that when he was in Jamaica, he says, I had to decide whether because he was such a brilliant and sufficiently achieved African, especially in the environment of Jamaica, being the fact that it was a society in which class was racialized to a color code. So therefore, the closer you were to white, the higher you were on the social ladder. Papa Garvey, being a very dark-skinned man, had a relatively prominent position, yeah, among his peers. That was not the common for somebody of his complexion. And so he says, I had to decide whether to please my friends and become one of the black whites, yeah, of Jamaica, or come out openly and defend the interest of the black millions and suffer as a result of that decision. He said, I decided to do the latter. Yeah. And so what you see there is what people would call class analysis, right? That we understand that the environment that we are in is organized in such a way to disadvantage and dispossess and disempower the masses of African people. And so within even the utterances of Papa Garvey himself, the race first principle is about serving the interests of the masses and not becoming a part of the elites of white power structures and serving their interests against the interests of African people worldwide. And I hope that makes that clear.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yes, sir.
I think to this day, sometimes people don't understand the impact, of the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and the UNIA, which was to this day the biggest African organization to ever, exist.
That was it.
In times where communications was much harder, right? Not like today where we have
Yes,
internet and this and
yes,
that.
Sir.
Including, in Cuba, I believe there were up to 11 chapters of the UNIA.
Yeah,
And,
Cuba had the most chapters in the whole of the Caribbean.
yeah.
I believe Trinidad was second. And yeah, so yeah,
this is history that not only is not taught, is not taught in Cuba, but the people have been lied to, because the discourse is that basically, Garvey was in Cuba, but he wasn't really successful here. His message didn't really go through. It didn't really, nothing really happened. How was he not successful if he had 11 chapters? You know what I mean? Like,
it's madness.
But
that even brings us, because it kind of highlights another point in relation to your last question.
Yeah.
Because Papa Garvey became well known in the Spanish speaking Caribbean and South and Central America, even prior to starting the UNIA-ACL, because he was involved in labor unions, around Costa Rica and Panama, between 1910 and 1912, right? And so his work, begins, right? Should I'm saying, advocating on behalf of the masses of our people. In fact, he was a timekeeper for the United Fruit Company, that imperialist corporation, and they attempted to seduce him with benefits, because he was asked to lead a strike on behalf of United Fruit workers, in Costa Rica, and he agreed to lead the strike, and as a result of it, was ousted from the nation. So we have to understand very, very clearly that when we look at the issue of self-determination, becoming a well-paid member of the white power establishment is the opposite, the complete opposite of self-determination. And so, no, we don't see that as aspirational from a race-first point of view.
No doubt. Yeah, appreciate it. Some people also think that when we speak about race first, they get it confused, and they think it's race only, which that brings up the point that you kind of touched on that already. Race first doesn't mean race only, meaning that it takes more. It's not just about being Black, It's not just about being African. That's not enough. We got to have behind it the ideology. We got to have the culture. We got to have,
That's right.
So, but you spoke a little bit about taking the work and making it viable, making it 100% relatable, right, to today, to what's going on today.
Yes, sir.
That's extremely key, because there's also a part of our movement that's kind of stuck in the past, and it doesn't translate, because we need the masses of our people. I mean, obviously, we're never gonna have everybody. This is not for everybody. We know this, right? But we still need to touch our people. We need the masses of our people. So for that, it needs to be relatable to today,
right,
and to what's going on today, right? So speak a little bit more, please, about that. You told me you're doing some work as far as bringing it to today's terms, and if you could elaborate on the importance of that.
So some of what I've said is along those lines already. It's just about crystallizing certain principles and certain values. I think that, especially as it relates to race first, the idea is that it's impossible for us to unite as African people, and we need to be more clear with these terms as well. What it means to unite. You know what I'm saying? But within the context of being an African people, because there's so many differences and diversity among African people. And so the idea being that one of our ancestors, scholars, Sheikh Anta Diop, decades ago, introduced this concept of the cultural unity of Black Africa. And so it's about what did he mean when he said that? He's basically saying that there are certain cultural ideals and forms that can form the basis of unity for us as African people, that organically already do, based upon our historic development. And so therefore we need to consciously now employ those to strengthening that unity, and to developing institutions that work on behalf of our interests and allow us to protect ourselves against the intrigue of white power and Western imperialism. All right. So that's an idea, and he wrote a whole book on that idea. But then the issue now for us is, well, how do we use that idea and practicalize it? In very concrete ways. One of the best examples I've seen of this, and that is relevant to the now, is in terms of language and the work that can be done in terms of developing our understanding of ourselves as a biocultural and geopolitical entity, because there are so many similarities, and the history of our indigenous languages are so linked, that if that becomes a part of our national consciousness, we dispel a lot of myths. There is a popular refrain that I hear that says that Africa is a continent, not a country. Africa is a continent of 54 countries, over 1,000 tribes, and over 3,000 or something like that languages. Yeah. And this is fundamentally Eurocentric colonial thinking.
I get the same talking points. Not to cut you off, but yeah, I get the same.
No, I'm not surprised, because that propaganda is put out by the institutions of white power as a reason for why principled and operational unity is impossible among African people. Yeah. And so the updating that we need to do it would also challenge that propaganda. Yeah. There's a linguist by the name of Baba Kwesi Pra, who has done some work with a number of different institutions that he's been a part of. And he says that African languages, generally speaking, what we're calling different languages are often dialects of root languages. And he's identified between 8 and 12 root languages, that exist across the African continent. And so the idea now is that because a lot of African languages have been condemned to folk languages that are not employed in politics, that are not employed in science, that are not employed in education in general, formal education in general, it's often just used in discourse. So there's often not written forms, recognizable written forms of the language, right? Used popularly. And so he says that you can, when you look at the 8 to 12 roots, you can develop what they call shared orthographies, which means shared ways of writing the language, that can be understood across people who conceive of themselves as speaking different languages. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so that is work that we need to be doing and engaging in now. The other probably obvious example is our spirituality. By the way, sorry, I should say that when that also the language example also relates to us in the diaspora and our various patois and our various Creole, because when you check it, even across, for example, the English speaking and the French speaking Caribbean, Jamaica and Haiti, for example. In Jamaica, we call it patois. In Haiti, it's called Creole, But if you check the grammatical structure of the languages, they're the same, coming from the same group of languages from Central and West Africa. You understand, right? So it's them kind of things that we need to popularize, and update on the cultural sense, because a lot of people condemn and don't have a very I think you made this point already, of culture. Understand what it is. Culture is political. Yes, culture is political, and so developing that cultural foundation has a political implication in terms of how we see ourselves and our connections as African people. And that is the kind of work that we need to be doing in this day and age.
Absolutely. Yeah. As far as these talking points, I get as well. And, sometimes these talking points, they come along and people, forget that, these are colonial borders too. They forget that part too. That's right. These are borders made by our oppressors, Yes. They're 100% colonial borders. And as Shekanta Dia pointed out, there are a lot more aspects that bring us together than aspects that divide us, right, within our culture. How would you, this will be like a simple question to you, but for certain people, they might not. How would you define what is it to be an African? What does it mean to be an African? And what is African culture?
Beautiful. So first and foremost, to be an African, most fundamentally, is to be a descendant of the indigenous people, of the African continent. And that's a global identity at this point in time. It is also to be conscious of the connections between various variations of what it means to be African. We also have to remember that the African identity, in its formal manifestation, comes about in opposition to the oppression of African people. it comes about to challenge divisions among African people that made it possible for the oppressive systems that are currently in place to be more successful than they would have been had we recognized ourselves as a unified people in the first place. Yeah. African identity is at once an organic historical fact and at the same time aspirational, right? And we shouldn't be shy about this. This is not something to be ashamed of. It's not even something to argue about. This is, another talking point. Africa has never been united under one government. No, it hasn't. Right? It never has. Yeah, right. That's a fact. All right, that's a fact. But there was once not a United States of America. There was once not an Australia as it exists today. There was once not a United Kingdom of Great Britain. So who's to say that it's not possible because, it was not done in history? And at the same time, to understand our geopolitical reality as African people today is to understand the extreme necessity of such a formation in this day and age. Yeah. And so and this is important because, it's okay to be African and identify some kind of commonality among African people as long as it doesn't challenge the global power structure as it currently is constituted. Yeah. What do I mean by that? It's okay to recognize African music as a genre. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? As long as African artists, for the majority, are still looking to achieve as far as getting a Grammy. Yeah. And sell millions in the European and the American market and be recognized by companies and corporations in that market. It's okay. It's okay to have Africa Day that is a celebration of Africa. Yes, in its totality, when the celebration is voided of its liberation element. It's no longer Africa Liberation Day.
Right.
It's just Africa Day. It's good to have Africa Day in that circumstance. Yeah. And you can have DJs from around the continent. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And MTV can go to Africa, right? And host a show, right? And you know what I'm saying? Okay. Under those circumstances, it is all well and good to acknowledge Africa as some kind of unified formation, because that formation doesn't challenge the geopolitical order. Yeah. And so to be African consciously in this day and age is to understand African identity as oppositional to white power, as a challenge, yes, to imperialist power as it is currently constituted in today's world. And if it doesn't do that, I believe it was also Cabral who says African culture, and I'm going to say African identity, will be revolutionary or it will not be.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Or it will not be. And so there are, and so I'm highlighting that because we have to resist the attempts to depoliticize our identity, to depoliticize our culture. And this is even a challenge for us who are dealing with African spiritual systems. There's a desire to depoliticize the spiritual systems, yeah, so that they don't become liberatory in their institutional framework, but just another religion that people can engage in. We have to, understand our historic mission as African people. And if we do, then as Baba John Henrik Clarke says, everything around us becomes a weapon.
No doubt. I appreciate that, my brother, 100%. It's like, it's basically what you were saying is that, as long as we measure success through the oppressor's lens, then it's cool. Yeah, it's cool to be, African, as long as, you can have the hair, you can wear the dashiki. But once you get to what it really is about,
right,
now there's a problem, and that I always say the same thing. Like, I say that as well. Like, our culture has to be African centered and revolutionary. It has to be revolutionary because we're at war. Our people are at war on a global level. And so if we don't combat that, then we're really not doing anything.
Yes, sir.
So I definitely appreciate your analysis.
Yes, sir.
To kind of to wrap this up about race first, you mentioned it a little bit, but still I want to bring it to today again and talk about the importance of a race first analysis as of today. As in, we see everything that's going on today.
Yeah.
we know what's going on in the Congo, in Sudan, in Haiti. We understand that, colonialism and neo-colonialism is still alive.
Yes.
We understand that the mental side is real. Our people are still very much brainwashed on a global scale.
Yes.
There is the eco side as well.
Yes.
This Western capitalism is gonna burn every single last piece of nature around the world, kill every river.
Yes.
When we speak about a race first analysis today in 2024, how relevant is it, and how does it operate?
Yeah. So Papa Garvey speaks about doing everything moral and social within the race. Yeah. And so it's about developing an independent power base among ourselves as a people, based upon our identity as a people, which means that we have to be about building institutions that serve our own interests, which means that we have to develop a consciousness that sees ourselves and our destiny as intricately tied and connected to the destiny of African people around the world. And so it's not just about, I support a man because he's black. I support a sister because black girls rock and I'm black, right? You know what I'm saying? And that's good in a lot of circumstances, right? You know what I'm saying? But that's not sufficient. And so the principle of race first, especially because of the fact that we are a global people, allows us to develop a global power base that is able, if employed correctly, to challenge the global hegemony of white power and Western imperialism. That is our responsibility. And when that happens, I'm in a contention with a lot of brothers and sisters now because of what is happening in Haiti. And the fact that the Caribbean community known as CARICOM, the organization of the governments and heads of state of the Caribbean, as it stands, has seen fit to jump in bed with all manner of justifications with the United Nations and the United States of America, in relation to solving the problems that, as they would try to convince us of what is taking place in Haiti. And the principle of race first, as Papa Garvey says himself, never allow them to have executive control over your affairs, because they will always shift and move things for their own benefit. The principle of race first would compel all of us in the Caribbean region to raise, at the very least, raise our voice against the machinations of the United States of America and the United Nations in Haiti, because these are our people. At the very least, what we must, even if we can't do anything else, we ain't got the economic power, we don't have the military might to challenge them. At the very least, we should be raising our voice and not jumping into bed with these individuals, and these corporations and these other institutions, And so when we talk about doing everything moral and social within the race, it means that on every level, we should be trying to organize with African people in our own interest. And that includes family and friendship. It includes schooling and education. It includes politics and law. Every area of people activity, there's an application of race first, because there are no areas of people activity within which Africans don't need to be organizing. We need to be organizing in all of them. And if we understand every institution as a form of organization, including family, and therefore community, then we would see the applications for race first everywhere. Family being the basic unit of a community, you know what I'm saying? And people tend to downplay the family thing. This is a ticklish issue now when we get to race first, because the idea of being in relationship, like having a political consciousness that compels you to find a compliment in another African man or woman, is something that people feel challenged about. But from a race first point of view, as a political formation, family is a form of organization. So before we get to love and and all these things, before we get to attraction and sexual desire, family is a form of organization. That's how we have to understand it. So even if my attraction is broader, yeah, right, than the African man or woman, even if that's the case. And there is even some examples of this in the life of Garvey himself. But if we're looking at it politically, yeah, then the union that I create as far as family, the children that I produce as far as family, has a political function in that regard. Yeah. The idea of African-centered education, revolutionary African-centered education, takes place because, for example, we have a responsibility to rewrite our history in a way that speaks to our organic and real development, and is not seen, that we don't see ourselves through the eyes of white power, Western imperialism. Yeah. And it's only when we're able to change that educational process in a way that allows the African worldview to be organically represented in the minds of African people, we will be able to naturally organize as instinct, yeah, in our own interest, if that makes sense. Yeah. And there are so many other examples that I could give, but you know, that's a basic answer to your question.
Yeah. You know, when you speak about Haiti, it's always something that, to me, we need to always put Haiti at the forefront. We understand that because the Haitian Revolution, you know, is one of the beginning points of, you know, Pan-Africanism, actually.
Yes, sir.
You know, when we come together
Absolutely.
and we decide that we're going to be free, right?
Absolutely.
You know, me as an Afro-Cuban, Haiti is also it's a place that is so close to us that, you know, when the ground shakes in Haiti, we feel it in the south of the island. You know, we feel it in the south of the island. And
of course.
And so, you know, I feel like Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba has a triangle there that's going on. And the fact that, like you said, the fact that we're able to be somewhat divided in many ways,
of course,
through this colonial process, which begins by the language, right? So we speak Spanish in one island, English in the other, you know, French in the other. And, you know, it's all the colonizers' language, right?
Let me ask you a question, real quick. It's something that I've considered, but I've never really asked anybody, because I know most people in Cuba speak Spanish, but and then you have the Lukumi community, you know, and they say they do Santeria, but there's like a Yoruba element there as well. But is there a generic kind of Creole in Cuba as well? I assume there would be.
So it's not an actual Creole. It can't really be. I don't know if it can be defined as that, but definitely the way we speak, you know, between ourselves is very hard for Spanish people to understand. Because of our accent, and the way we speak sounds very much so certain things like Yoruba. And also my uncle was actually a Babalawo. You know, my uncle was a Babalawo, and so. When he passed away, my cousin got all his books, and in his books, most of his books were actually in Yoruba. So our elders actually could read it, you know, and they understood it. I don't remember them necessarily speaking Yoruba. But there's definitely a lot of, you know, obviously the knowledge comes from these books, and in the way we speak, and then there are certain words. There are certain words that are said here and there. But it's not. It's still Spanish. It's still Spanish that we speak. Just with a heavy accent.
Okay.
You know, the way that we talk. Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's something that I've been curious about.
Yeah. You know? No doubt.
Yeah. But I take your point. Yeah, and you know, to a significant degree, the intrigue that has been levied upon Cuba, Haiti, and Jamaica suggests that if we get those three islands right, it's the key to unlock the entire region, in a lot of ways, and you can see that based upon, you know, the stranglehold that they try to maintain on Haiti, the isolation that they've placed on Cuba, despite all of its contradictions, people often don't realize, you know, how significantly African Cuba is as far as its population is concerned. It's like Brazil. You know what I'm saying? The face of Brazil is very white, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. That's how they work it the same way. It's very similar. Yep.
Right. You know what I'm saying? And then you look at the intrigue and the political intrigue in Jamaica, and the destabilization of the Jamaican economy. You know, there's something there. And it's interesting that those three islands speak three different European languages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying again, like just looking at it from a race first point of view, if we were able, to
Exactly,
overcome
exactly.
those, that the race first principle allows us to overcome linguistic barriers.
That's where I was going with it. Exactly.
Right. Sorry. Go. I'm
No, you go
ahead.
ahead. You cooking, bro. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You know what I'm saying? Because we will recognize the linguistic barrier as colonially imposed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was speaking to brother Jeffrey Kaiti, who's from Haiti, yeah, about what's taking place in Haiti at the moment. And he said, you know, in Haiti, you can't do anything serious in French. He said the majority of the population speaks the Creole. Yeah,
Creole,
right. You know what I'm saying? But the language of the elite is French. He said you can't even make love in French. Yeah, in Haiti, right? He said you know you could do some things, but they won't be serious, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No,
and I'm saying that if we were able to identify like linguistically the connections between ourselves, that would be overcome just like that, and we could teach our various different Creole to each other. As a part of our formal education system.
Absolutely.
Right? This is what I'm saying. Then now, coming back to something that I mentioned a minute ago, you know, in Jamaica, there's still a law on the books that bans what they call obia, which is basically what they call African spiritual systems. Yeah.
It's still a law?
There's a law on the books today. Yeah. The law came about, quick story, the law came about after 1776 because a man called Chief Taki waged the biggest anti-slavery rebellion in the Caribbean prior to that of Haiti, in 1760, yes. Chief Taki waged a rebellion on the island, and basically that rebellion was organized by the indigenous priesthood, and what they call obia man and obia woman, Chief Taki himself, was what would be more properly be referred to as a Mayan man, but which the British called obia, and obia became a umbrella term for all indigenous African spiritual systems, and really even a reduction and a mockery of indigenous African spiritual systems that developed the caricature of witchcraft, and that kind of thing. So that rebellion was organized by basically the indigenous quote unquote priesthood. And so they banned the spiritual system because of its capacity to organize the people. But then if you look at that and you look at voodoo in Haiti and you look at Lukumi in Cuba, again, you see the foundation for us to overcome barriers of division and see ourselves as a united geopolitical and biocultural entity. All of the material is there, and they are afraid of us being able to employ that in a way that is manifestly political, because once we do that, their authority, at least conceptually, becomes null and void. Their authority is diminished just on the basis of us identifying ourselves as ourselves.
Yeah, no doubt. I think one of the ways they do that, at least I know in Cuba, is through, micro-nationalism, nationalism, we're all Cubans, Cuba, and then the flag and this and that, and this is why I've done the effort, you say, it's funny you say you're a spoken word artist. I'm actually a hip hop artist,
sir.
And in Cuba, a lot of times when there was, hip hop concerts, a lot of people would put the Cuban flag, but we would always put the RBG flag, So, that's another one of the ways in which we can put, race first. If we identify our flag as the RBG flag, whether we're in Haiti, whether we're in Jamaica, whether we're in Cuba.
Yes, sir. Then,
that
I learned, and I'm unfortunate, I never got into it, partly because of the language barrier, partly just because of access. But I learned about, like maybe 2 decades ago, about how hip hop was being employed politically in Cuba to assert, an African identity, a Black identity, and race consciousness.
Absolutely.
But then I'm learning from you now that even that is being watered down as far as the hip hop that is being created, and that political edge is being lost.
The Cuban hip hop history is far interesting, because at first we actually had, in the times where Asada earlier was over there with Nahanda Abiodun. Sister Nahanda Abiodun was out there as well, and she became, she's known, may she, rise in power, but she's known as the Cuban hip hop godmother, the godmother of Cuban hip hop. So she used to do political education classes to the artist.
Right.
I'm from the generation just after that, but I learned from the brothers and sisters that used to speak the Nahanda, right?
Yes.
And then at some point, that kind of, the same thing, the same thing as in the US and other places where it kind of gets watered down, it gets co-opted, as well. People want to be able to perform in certain places. And when we're talking, my group is called 340 MS. And, when we're talking about Africanness and these kind of things in Spanish, that's also difficult because as far as traveling and selling your music and all that, music in Spanish, people want to hear Latin America, all this stuff, and things that we don't necessarily refer to. We refer to Africa all the time, right? And people want to hear more so Abiyala and things like that. And we go back to the motherland, and so we have more difficulty. So there's that, and then there's also a thing that happened within Cuban hip hop, which is a little more recent, which is that organizations from the United States government started infiltrating and trying to get their way in there because they saw that the people of Cuba were speaking were speaking against the government.
Right.
Now, people today also, they get it twisted though, because people think that people started speaking against the government because the US was infiltrated. It happened the other way around. People first started protesting because since I was a youth, I can remember us having problems with the police because we're African, because we're black, right? Within the island.
Right.
And then we started talking about, these are the problems we go through here in Cuba, even though we are a socialist country, we still go through this, that, there's racism, and then so the US, these organizations like USAID and all these, imperialist organizations started, investing in that.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
No, I just want to make sure, because some people think the only reason people are speaking up in Cuba is because USAID is giving money. No, it happened the other way around, actually.
The other way around. No, that is an important point. A lot of the time, and Cuba is very political, and I always have to make it clear that if I'm criticizing Cuba, I'm criticizing Cuba in defense of African people, not in defense of the American establishment, right? You know what I'm saying? And there are many people who want us to challenge Cuba in defense of the American establishment. But look at that, bro. That in order to, this is not the only example of this, but in order to assert that the similar thing happens with reggae music, like on the African continent, reggae music is very, very big in many places on the African continent, But in order to assert ourselves in Cuba, we drew on a tradition of African people that was created by African people in a place other than where we reside. We embrace the cultural expression of African people in another part of the world as an assertion of our own identity. It's a similar thing on the African continent, that where reggae music is a music of the assertion of an African pride and political consciousness, right? Now, there are many in brothers and sisters, many say that they're the minority in the United States of America at the moment, who are trying to disavow and negate all influences of Africans from any other part of the world, which is ridiculous, right? But wherever the case may be, Africans in America have also drawn upon the inspiration of Africans from the continent and the Caribbean in the affirmation and the assertion. If Cuba has a very significant history in that regard, the influence of Cuba on the development of musical styles and expressions among Africans in America is a story that I think is probably yet to be told, right? You know what I'm saying? But if you know certain things, you know that they're obvious, right? But I'm saying that organically in our liberatory movements, you can see the principle of race first, race awareness and cultural emancipation first, like organically developing and existing among us, in our artistic expressions and how we politicize them towards our liberatory aims.
Right. Yeah. Real quick, to get back to what you said, I want to clarify as well, because it's like you said, Cuba is very political, you know, and so I always make sure I clarify, just in case if people don't know and it's the first time they're hearing me. I always say, before I criticize Cuba as well, I'm anti-imperialist, right? I'm anti-capitalist, right? You know what I mean? I'm anti-colonialist, and I'm a Pan-Africanist. But I'm an African first, And so when I see what my people, what Africans from Cuba are going through within Africa, I have to speak up. I have to speak up. You know,
this is a point, an essential point, because another point of contention is the fact that a lot of our brothers and sisters support Cuba and Castro unreservedly. And the principle of race first, as I was told, my father always used to say, if you want to know how the feelings and the thoughts and the institutional behavior of a regime or a government is in relation to African people, look at how the Africans in the nation are being treated. Look at the lot of the Africans in that nation. And so from a race first point of view, it was always very difficult for us to celebrate Cuba, recognizing, its significance as an anti-imperialist nation, recognizing, even as our brothers and sisters would like to convince us of, the fact of the role that it played in the anti-apartheid movement,
we can't deny
Congo
that.
and Angola and all of these things, But I was always taught, but hold on, the majority of the people that went to Angola were African.
That's true. That's true.
Right? You know what I'm saying? Who recognize their connection to their people in Angola. And so that is often left out of the story. But that race first analysis leads us to be guarded against the unreserved celebration of all anti-imperialist formations when they are oppressive. Is that I always ask, can we be a liberated as African people without an African consciousness and without African culture? Right? Is that possible? Right? And you know what I'm saying? Are we, are we just seeking freedom and liberation as an abstraction? Right? You know what I'm saying? Or as defined by somebody else's problems? The white working class have their problems and they have their beef, and it's a just fight that they're fighting. But is that fight exactly the same as our own? And should we discard our own, for the sake of adopting for them thing? That is the question that we have to ask and answer. So I give thanks for ones like yourselves and those who came before you, who have been brave enough to raise, the contradiction of Cuba for our knowledge and our wisdom and our understanding, in this time.
No, thank you, my brother. I give thanks to you because I was talking to my comrade, Vladimir, who's also from Cuba, and sometimes it gets lonely, because it gets lonely for us, man, because when we speak up about Afro-Cubans and the difficulties that we go through, in Cuba, a lot of brothers and sisters in the movement don't want to hear it because they say, Cuba, I'm not speaking up against Cuba in any way because of how Cuba contributed to, to the movement, which I said, it's, I'm not denying these things, I'm not denying the importance of the help that Cuba had and continues to outside of Cuba, but you have to look at what's going on inside, as you said. So I definitely appreciate that. Definitely appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Man, this has been a rich conversation. I want to talk to you a little bit about you as an artist, as a spoken word artist. How did you get into spoken word? And because I'm a fan of spoken word. As a hip hopper, spoken word is part of the culture. It's part of the culture as well.
100%. I mean, I grew up in a family that was, heavy on African cultural expressions globally, right? So I'm very musically inclined, and so all those expressions I grew up on. Muta Baruka, dub poet from Jamaica, I grew up on. You know what I'm saying? Staple, diet. The Last Poets, you know what I'm saying? Niggas are scared of revolution. It was like, you know what I'm saying? It was, you know what I mean? It was a staple thing for me. And then in the UK, there was a strong spoken word tradition. So, for example, there's a group called Lioness Chant, who were two sisters, Auntie Fina and Auntie Nefertiti. And they were quite big over here. And then there's another man by the name of Anum Iyapo, who now goes by the name Ankh Anum, Ankanum. I'm spelling out his name because one of the albums that I was raised on was his album called Songs of the Motherland. Wow. And it's just been re-released by his son, who's a jazz artist by the name of Shabaka Hutchins. And so you can find it on Spotify and all your digital streaming platforms now. Ankh Anum, Songs of the Motherland. It's one of the most brilliant bodies of work I've ever come across. And he's a words artist as well. So I grew up on that. And then there was, you know, reggae and hip hop and Afrobeat, original Afrobeat, Fela and Nicola Pakuti. Yeah, we can have a whole conversation about that. But
I love that. How you like what Seun Kuti is doing?
I love what Seun Kuti is doing.
Me too.
You know, I've had the opportunity to interview the brother as well, and he's definitely walking in the footsteps of his father. You know, 100%. And most importantly, protecting the art form, the music as an outlet for political expression. It's extremely important what he's doing. Yeah, 100%. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, so I kind of come from that. I used to rap quite a bit, so I've always written lyrically, poetry and rap. But as a, you know, performance wise, it was more rapping as a teenager, as a child and a teenager. You know, and I don't know how I just naturally evolved into doing spoken word. I think I liked the freedom of not being mathematically confined to a beat, but still having the rhythm, right? Do you know what I'm saying? So if you listen to my early spoken word pieces, they were very, very much like raps. Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? In that regard, I mean, you know, I'm probably somewhere different with it now. And to be fair, every now and then I'll still, you know, get into my rap bag. Yeah. But you know, that as well as the dancer, you know what I'm saying, Jamaican dancer expression, I still do that as well. You know, so that, yeah, so I kind of came on the poetry scene in like 2003. I was like 18 years old, and then joined a spoken word group called The Best Kept Secret, along with my big brothers and sister, Oneness, Tugstar, and Aminoir. And we used to do like spoken word theater. Yeah. So we would take some of our pieces and create a whole theatrical production out of it. You know, so yeah, I'm always my best self when I'm active creatively, if that makes sense. And I love that. So yeah, I'm going to be getting back into it, you know, soon, and reaching out to some brothers and sisters to do some work as well. I don't know how active you are at the moment, but we'll definitely do some stuff if you are.
I was going to say, we definitely going to have to, we're going to have to speak offline, brother, because we're definitely going to link up for sure.
Yes, sir.
No doubt. And it's funny you also mentioned Mutabaruka, man, because Mutabaruka, he's one of my great inspirations. As far as ideology, brother, he's very complete. And, you know, I used to listen to him a lot. And even when I first went vegan, you know, when I stopped eating meat and I went completely ITAL and everything, Mutabaruka, he gets into a lot of important things.
He does. A beautiful person. I've had the opportunity to meet him many times, and I've also had the opportunity to open for him. And host him when he's been in London. Very just a humble African. And words cannot express the impact that he has had on my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, same. I actually saw you interview him one time, not too long. I think it was during the summer or maybe before the summer. Just passed. He was on your platform, I think. Definitely. I checked that out for sure.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, my brother. So I appreciate that. Before you go, I like to do the book recommendations here on the VITAL HOOPS podcast, because, you know, a lot of our people are just getting their information from short clips, you know, and IG and these things. And so we can't forget that that's okay, you know, but it's important to go back to the books sometimes, you know, and get that knowledge from the books. I feel like it's key. So I know it's difficult sometimes, but if you can recommend something good for the listeners.
So I have prepared for this. So let's go through them. Yeah. All right, so my book recommendation, let me do the first one. Is this one, which on the title of the show is Race First. That's right. But the subtitle is also important, by Baba Tony Martin, who I mentioned earlier. The subtitle is The Ideological and Organizational Struggles of Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So this is really the standard bearer in terms of getting a foundational knowledge, on Papa Garvey. And so this is not a biography. It's really that does what it says on the tin. It looks at the ideological and organizational struggles of Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Essential work. And he has a smaller one called Marcus Garvey Hero, which is like written for teenagers. So it's a basic kind of summation of this book, but this is the best overview that exists right now. And we'll give you a proper understanding of the principle of race first and its application to a certain degree, as exemplified in the work of the organization. And that, so for example, let's give you one example: the fact that Papa Garvey, there was an election and I forget what role the election was for at the time, yeah. But he basically said that the working Africans, there was a candidate that was an African, yeah, and he was basically saying that this African is, you know, working on behalf of these elites and these corporations, and we as the working man and woman have nothing in common with that particular African at this moment in time. Yeah, right. You know what I'm saying? He said that, right? And Tony Martin said that actually at that time, he actually said that if we're gonna vote, that we should vote for this white candidate. Yeah, at that time, in place of that. Yeah, so that's a interesting dynamic there. Yeah,
right.
You know what I'm saying? And then I'm gonna say on the subject of cultural unity, a beautiful book is by my spiritual mother. Yeah, and it's just been reprinted, Mama Marimba Ani. If you don't know, get to know.
Yes.
But Let the Circle Be Unbroken. So this is the new and expanded edition. Yeah. And it's really just about our spiritual cultural connectedness as African people. Yeah. And how that spiritual cultural connectedness is political, and how they try to diminish that understanding because it serves their political interest. But we have to basically generate that consciousness of our connectedness as African people, you know, as a political entity. Yeah. So that's Let the Circle Be Unbroken. A lot smaller, you know what I'm saying? You know, get through, but a beautiful text nonetheless. And in fact, I have the honor in this edition of having written and submitted a recommendation, so you'll find me in here as well.
Nice.
Yeah, appreciate that. Shane Kuti is also in here as well. He's got a piece in here. Yeah. And finally, well, actually, I just thought of something. So let's say second to last. Yeah. Decolonizing the African Mind by Baba Chinweizu, who's an Igbo man from Nigeria. But this was transformative for me in my teens. I read this book. And just to give an idea of some of the topics that he deals with, it's really essays that apply to how we apply our political consciousness in various different ways. So he's got part one is on economics, and he deals with maldevelopment of African nations. He deals with the debt trap. Part two is history, and he deals with decolonizing African history. Part three is politics, and he deals with Zionists, Arabists, and Panafrikanists. Yeah, as one chapter, one essay. Part four is about cultural control, and he looks at the Olympic Games and the Black world. Yeah, it's a chapter I come back to quite regularly nowadays. Then part five is on literature. Yeah, literature and and nation building in Africa is one chapter. So this is like just essays on various different topics. Yeah, that can, you know, develop your race first consciousness. And finally, I had the pleasure recently of being a part of the team that produced. So every year, Mama Marimba Ani, she produces this newspaper called The African World. Yeah, in May, alongside a ritual that she hosts called Abakosem Sunsum, which loosely translated means the spirit of history. This year's one was released in May of 2024. But because of the uprisings in Kenya, what was taking place in Haiti, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Senegal, you know, etc. She wanted to do a special edition of the African World that was really delving into those current dynamics and the context for those current dynamics. Yeah. Okay. And so we recently published that at the beginning of this month, in fact. Yeah. So at the end of last month, the month of Mosiah, August, the African World Special Edition is called The War Report. Yeah,
that's online, right, on your website.
So you can get that.
I got that.
Right.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay, good. So check that out.
Encourage the listeners, to check it out.
Yeah, you know, like I'm quite proud of it, but the feedback as well has been phenomenal. There's a section in there where we actually detail the different US military bases on the African continent. Yes. In the essay called Occupied Territory. Yeah. So do check that out. The information in there is phenomenal, and you can get that on the website for my the media institution that I'm currently directing, which is Kimbunga Media, KIMBUNGA media.com, kimbungamedia.com. You'll find the War Report there. So that's my fourth recommendation.
Yes. Also, give them your socials as well, my brother. Your personal and the Kimbunga Media as well, so they can follow.
So my personal is ShakaRa Speaks on everything. Yeah. ShakaRa speaks on everything. I am on most things. Or that people my age are on anyway. I'm not on Snapchat or nothing like that.
Yeah, same. I can't do it.
I just about do TikTok. You know what I mean? So
that's tough. I haven't been able to do TikTok either.
You know what? I was popping on TikTok, and then the US and the UK government decided to go to war with China, economic war with China, and my TikTok ain't never been the same.
Wow.
You know? So yeah, no, it's bad. That's a whole story right there. How they've actually, sought to go to warfare with a social media platform is very interesting. But yeah, I am on TikTok though. So yeah, ShakaRa speaks on everything, and then Kimbunga Media is Kimbunga Media on everything. So KIMBUNGA Media on everything. Kimbunga, by the way, for those who don't know, is spoken in what is referred to as the Kiswahili language, but I'm learning now to say Kiubuntu because Kiswahili is a term that relates even linguistically to the Arabization of the language. So there are brothers and sisters who speak the language that are teaching me to say Kiubuntu, which is closer to, because it's actually an indigenous language, right? So in the Kiubuntu language, Kimbunga translates as whirlwind and storm. Papa Garvey said, "Look for me in the whirlwind, look for me in the storm."
Absolutely.
And so that's the energy that we're bringing.
Yeah, we like in our organization, the Pan-African League Umoja, we say Umoja ni nguvu, unity is strength. But I know but I've heard that there are many Arabic words within the language as well, right? Yeah,
there are. I mean, so I've been on journeys with this. There are some more Arabically inclined, who will try to basically give the impression that the language is the creation of the Arabic speakers. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So it doesn't exist without the Arabic in it, right? And yeah, so that, which is forced. Yeah, so then there are many who, when Kiswahili was being posited as a possible Pan-African language, there are some who challenged it on that basis. But then I learned studying with Brother Robin Walker that in actual fact, Kiswahili preserves the highest percentage of the original, what they call Bantu words, of all of the so-called Bantu languages, right? So you're able to derive, but it sounds like it's more a case of there were words in the language that were indigenous, but then because of the Arabic influence, those words became replaced. I see the same thing with Jamaican patois now. Whereas there was a word that my grandparents would have used, but we're no longer using that now because it's been anglicized further and further. So yeah, but yeah, we should all learn some African languages.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
No doubt, my brother. Yeah. ShakaRa, my brother, I appreciate you. Whatever you need. Whenever you need, you already know we're connected.
My brother, thank you very much. We're connected. And before I realized that you are from Cuba, I was even pleased because one of the things that we're trying to do is bridge the gap between French speaking and English speaking Africa, especially in Europe. You know what I'm saying? And on the African continent. So I was pleased. Yeah. So I look forward. I'm going to be coming to France at some point because I know some brothers and sisters.
Please.
So when I come, I'm going to be hitting you up.
Yes, without a doubt, my brother. The socials are down in the description. The website, kimbungamedia.com. Everybody go check that out. Subscribe. And ShakaRa, like I said, give thanks to my brother. And, we going to win by any means necessary.
By any means necessary. Ashe.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
All right. Much respect to the brother ShakaRa. Make sure you support Kimbunga Media, support Black Power Media, support Vital Hoops Podcast. We appreciate you. Leave a comment and share this video with the people around you. African power and African liberation for all African people, as the brother ShakaRa says. We out. Vital Hoops for the people, by the people, for the culture. Uhuru.